Right, this isn't my first demo of the UBxa from Behringer. If you haven't seen my original deep dive, I'll put a link in the description. But since I've done that, they've done a few firmware updates on things that I'd originally mentioned in that video. And it's reduced in price a fair bit. You can now pick it up for an unbelievable £755 at Thomping and £579 for the desktop version. In Anderton's in the UK, it's an insane £719. I think originally it was £999, then it went up to about £1,100 for the keyboard version, and now the desktop is just £589. And in the US, Sweetwater has got them for $1,300 or $950. So it does look like the tariffs are unfortunately having an effect on the price in the US, because they were originally on parity with the EU price, which will bring it to around $850 for the keyboard version. Looking at the price at Thomping at the minute. Yeah, so that's about $450 more than I'd expect, to be honest. And there were two main things I brought up in that review. The first was that there was a thump when you played a unison note or a chord in chord mode, because all the notes were hitting at the same time. And the second was that the Atrophy mode gave you loads of access to all this sort of vintage decaying chaos, but you couldn't save it per patch. And luckily, both of those have been addressed in the new firmware. I think they call it version 2 firmware, but it's actually version 0.3.124. And if you've not updated since new, I would highly recommend it. We'll start off by taking a look at that thumping, and this is a nice big thick unison patch. That's absolutely perfect, isn't it? Let's try another. Here we go, a standard big sync sweep. These are all ones I've programmed by myself, by the way, from an initial patch, so there's no weird modulations I'm not aware of in there. And that was caused by a background calibration routine, it says in the update notes. So it has been found and it has been fixed. And I think I noticed that when the beta testers didn't, because I use chord mode an awful lot. It's really good for playing something musical and tweaking parameters in these demos. This is a nice patch for that, so. Nice sort of mighty sounding piano. A Juno sounding piano. I've called it Try a -7, so let's do that. Again, not doing it. Interesting with the chord mode, one thing I did mention in my original demo was the way the chord mode works isn't ideal. So to create a chord, you need to play the chord and then hit chord, which seems fine and easy enough, but you take it off, put it back on again, it's gone. That's one little annoyance. But the main thing for me is that you can't do, if I wanted to do that as a chord, I can't do it. So you have to be playing the chord when it goes on. It'd be nicer if you could sort of hold chord and then play a few notes. But, you know, you need to somehow press chord while using your two hands. So in my previous demo, I did this, which worked. But it's a bit annoying having to use your nose. Let's try that on another pad, shall we? Let's try that on, got a nice one up here somewhere. This one's nice. again. I'm trying to use this pad so you can hear that there's no thumping, it's really obvious. Does sound nice though, doesn't it? So the thumping has been sorted. Let's take a look at these Atrophy settings then. Originally, you'd go to Shift and Vintage, and you've got your Atrophy settings there, 1 to 8. And you set that globally, and every time you loaded the patch, whatever you'd set this at, it stayed at. But you'll notice we saw one there saying patch, it's gone now, because that was actually saved within the patch. We can now save all the HP settings within the patch itself. But also, we can still use these sort of global ones. So if we wanted it just to be on UB8 all the time, we put it onto UB8, and now it's on UB8. It's too far off. But if we loaded another patch that didn't have its own saved Atrophy settings, it will always be UB8. So if I go to, because I've saved mine mainly, which are in D on this, with their own settings, but if I come to, let's come out of there. Let's go to A. I think these aren't saved with them, so go into there, we're on UB8. If I load another patch, well, let's run the mine again, come out of Shift. Let's go back into A, come out of Shift. Go to whatever this is. Step pad. We go Shift and Vintage, it's still on UB8. If I change that now to Creamy, it's changed. If I go back to another sound, it will still be on Creamy. As long as that sound doesn't have the saved HB settings in it. Let's just come out of this so I know where I am. Still in Shift, let's go to A. Let's go to the read piano. Okay. That's the HV settings. It's still on Creamy. So you can just leave it and it'll act as normal, or you can go in and, like I've done on mine, go to come out of there, come into my settings here and Shift Vintage. I've saved a lot of them with the patch, which means all the new settings, all the settings you've got on there, including all the new HB settings, and there are some of those as well, are all saved within the patch. So loads of people, including me, wanted to be able to save the HV settings per patch, but Behringer have taken it one step further, and you're not just saving the global settings per patch, you're saving all the individual parameters that you've set within that patch in the patch itself. And apart from that, if we hit some of these buttons, for example, we can change the Atrophy settings without having to go into the Atrophy menu. So got the filter frequency range or the filter pedal amount. Hit that and we can change the frequency range from, well, whatever we want to change it to really, but that's essentially a shortcut to the Atrophy settings, resonance, fine setting. You just press it and hold it. VCF envelope range. So hit it, 120 semitones, and we're changing that down to whatever. So again, all this is the HP settings. Actually, this is something new. So maybe move over to something new then. Maybe move over to the additional control settings, because I think we've done the Atrophy, lots more little bits and bobs in there, and you've got instant access, or you can save them per patch. With the control settings, for example, if I hit 4-pole, we've got we can go into the filter or the loudness envelope, so either the envelopes, hit OK, and we can invert them just by clicking plus or minus, repeat, or retrigger, or loop. So easy access to those, and legato mode as well. So there's easy access to things on the envelopes and onto the LFO, for example. So go into oscillator 1 frequency, hold that, VShow LFO 1 amount. This will give us the range of the knob for VCO 1. So from 6 to 60 semitones. So you have different ranges for oscillator 2. Oops. Press OK. It's on 12 at the minute. Again, 6 to 63. So we have different LFO ranges for the different oscillators. Same with the PWM, LFO amount, PWM, LFO amount. So I won't go through everything it's got in here. But it's well worth checking out the manual, seeing all those extra little bits that we've got that we didn't have before. And this is a super little addition. The performance section on the left can now be saved. If we go into the global settings, miscellaneous, side panel, it's number 2. And if we click on that, we can save the side panel pair patch as well. So it's on X, which means it's there. So it's turned on. And these are some of the patches I've recently made. Let's come back from there. So if we look down here as I flick through them, the different patches have got different settings, which is super, super useful, especially with the modulation section and having the transpose. So if you've got a bass tone, for example, you're not having to transpose down every time. So you can actually see it made a fair amount of use of that. And the second LFO settings are saved, which means that you can sync that to the LFO one, which is super cool. And I've used it in a fair few patches. And after using this in depth for quite a while now, I've created a patch bank with 128 tones. That takes an awful long time to do, but it means that I've really, really got to grips with it and played with it in depth. So it's worth talking about it, I think, from a user perspective after having one for a while. And the first thing to mention, I suppose, is the screen, because I think it's fair to say a lot of people weren't impressed with it when it originally came out, particularly the positioning of the screen right of center. And that didn't really bother me because I'm not normally sitting in the ideal position anyway. I'm normally moving between the computer and the keyboard and something else and messing about. So the actual positioning wasn't too much of a bother for me, but the contrast does change as you move your head. In the studio, it's fine, it's darker there, but in here, I've got floor-to-ceiling windows in front of me, floor-to-ceiling windows to the side of me, and 2 roof lights, and it's just not quite bright enough. You do feel like you're really concentrating on it. It's almost like playing a video game, the amount of concentration that you got to put into looking at the screen at times, especially when we come to do something like, I don't know, write the name of a patch. Oops, no, don't want to do that. I want to write it. If we come into write, I don't want to write over one of mine I've just created, so let's come out of that, cancel. Let's go to another one I'm not bothered about, read piano. No, not too bothered by that. So let's write over this. So write, confirm. And just as you're doing this, it seems to flicker in and out a little bit, and it's really difficult to read on some, when it gets really sunny outside. Yeah, it's really, and you can see it's flashing a bit. It just means I'm concentrating an awful lot on the screen. And I realize it's just quite tiring to do for long periods. So if they ever bring a version 2 out, I'm voting for a new screen. So finally, I've touched on this as I've been playing with it, maybe you've noticed, is navigating these menus can be a little weird at times. So if I come into, I don't know, vintage, or I know, come into the voice mode. So you've got voice panning, Atrophy settings, and I enter that. So I'm in like 2 menus deep now. And so I need to get back from that to go somewhere else or see what patch I want. I can't see what, if I press right, I'm now going to write over the patch. I don't want to write over the patch. So I've just waited for the patch. But if we go back into the voice again, thankfully it wasn't one of mine. Go into the voice panel, have the Atrophy profile, and you can save it per patch. For example, now how do I get back and see what patch I'm in? There's no back button. If you press these 2 buttons, for example, and it took you back up the menu system or just to the main screen that shows you which patch you're in. So this is flashing. So I'm in that menu, am I? No, I'm in that menu, save location, current patch, and come out of there then. Oh, so I've gone back a menu setting. It's all doable. It just gets a little bit confusing every now and then. And I've lost count of the number of times I lost a whole patch because I didn't know which mode I was in, and I accidentally pushed one of the assignable reset recall buttons on the right hand side and wipe out everything it did. Wasn't sure if it was in shift or not, that sort of thing. So a back or a home button would be really useful. A home button or a combination of buttons that took you back to the screen that just showed you what the patch name was, so you start from the top of the menu system, would be really useful. And I don't know if there is, there may well be one, I've not found it. So if you do find it or you do know about one, I've not found it in the manual. So if there is one, do let me know, because that'd be really handy. And I don't think it'd be something too hard to implement if it's not there. Overall, those final comments are really minor points and possibly brought to the forefront of my mind because I spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks preparing 128 patches. And that means that you are concentrating on stuff, you are concentrating on the screen, you are going up and down the menu systems. But it does also show that I have used this a lot and I would still recommend it as a modern 16 voice polysynth for, what was it in Anderton's, £745. It's absolutely insane value for money. And it's, you know, I would highly recommend it as a synth in its own right. But after using it for so long as well, what I thought was really interesting was when it first came out, the Atrophy settings was sort of like a magnet and everyone was concentrating on them, and it was really interesting how you could make it sound like degraded in certain ways. But once you've been using it for a while, you forget about the Atrophy really. That's good for specific tones perhaps, if you want to do something where you've got a resonance, and the resonance, like I showed earlier, you know, is different through the envelopes on different voices and stuff. That's great, but for just producing tones, I've just left it on the modern setting and I've sort of forgot about it, and I suspect a lot of other people will do the same. So saving the special ones is brilliant, but most of the time I just leave it sort of, I don't know if it would be flat as modern, but it sounds great as a modern synth. And that brings me to my 128 patch bank that I have been harping on about throughout the whole of this. I'll play all the tones, or most of the tones, or some of the tones, because there are 128 of them. I'll play them at the end. But you know, I've been trying to do stuff on this that you'll put on a modern track, not concentrating on trying to recreate the 70s, well, the 80s, I suppose, not really the 70s, unless it was a time traveling UBxa. But yeah, I've been trying to do modern term stuff I would perhaps use in a track. And again, as I say, it sounds great. It sounds like a modern synth, but it does have the limitations of the UBxa, and it does tend to take you down certain types of sound. So if you listen to any of the patch banks on it, you can tell it's got that Oberheim style flavour in all the tracks. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, subscribe and do all those things. And I will see you next time, but hang on, because I'm going to play through a load of those tones from my patch bank, which I should mention you can buy on starskycar.com. Anyway, I'll see you next time. That is the end of the talky bit.